Hi everybody, welcome to Leon's Chainsaw Parts and Repair. Happy Saturday morning. So we're looking at carburetors again, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, I shouldn't say that. A very strong plurality might be the best way to put it, of emails I get are concerning carburetors. And it can be a lot of different things. It can be, hey, I need a new carburetor. We've talked about that, especially for these old home lights, that there's good alternatives to that, since new carburetors don't grow on trees. But there's also the repair aspects, the parts needed, I've got it back on the saw and something's still not right. I put a kit in it. So we're going to try and cover some of that stuff today, and I've made myself a few notes because I tend to come into a video with a lot of thoughts in mind and then, forget one or two or 10, however it may go. I don't want this to scare folks off, though, because a strong majority, and this time I'm comfortable saying that, of carbs, can be done with the simple kits, the gasket and diaphragm kits. Katie? Yeah, you guys can't see her, but there was a hand inching towards the camera here. So most carbs you can do that. Just throw the diaphragm gasket kits in, and you're good to go. This is for the ones that you're not good to go. So, if you've rebuilt a carb and it still won't run right, there's no guarantee that it is the carburetor. There's a lot of things that it could be outside of that. But we'll start with what it could be inside the carb. So, changing out the gaskets and diaphragms that's kind of the no-brainer. Something that can be overlooked is this fuel inlet screen right there. That is where fuel has been piped up out, and then it goes through this filter screen. If that screen isn't there, that's a problem. You want to put it in. If your kit didn't include it, you're going to have to find one. But these kits from Walbro, Tillotson, and Zama, as far as I can recall, I haven't come across one that doesn't include that screen. So make sure you've got that in there. Now, if you didn't change it out, did you pay close attention to it? Because many times there will be an accumulation of debris, whether sawdust or filter material that has built up in here. And let me tell you, that can choke off fuel flow really fast. So if you've got one of those, you rebuilt the carb, put it on the saw, you're like, man, it'll start. It's a little hard to start, but it'll start, it'll rev up, and then die out. That can be the culprit. So if you didn't pay attention to that on the first go around, get back into it and at least double check. On this side, the inlet side of the carburetor, that's about all I can think of. Unless, are your gaskets in the correct order? Now, I've lost count of how many times I've seen this. You've got your flat block. That is what the diaphragm goes to. And these two flapper valves cannot operate unless this is against the block. Your actual gasket, which provides the circuit, goes out and towards the cover. These ridges form these various passages and circuits through here. If you reverse that, if it does run, it's going to run like crap. So the other side. Now, obviously, I've already got this torn apart. Obviously, this is an HDC. Certain carbs are, have unique features to them, but we're going to go with as much generic as we can here. And where there's important differences, I'll point them out. Now, on this side, your inlet needle. Now, there's a number of things to check, if you didn't replace your inlet needle, is the tip swollen? Now this one's not. I can see a wear ridge. Sorry, I've got the viewfinder. Camera's at such an angle, the viewfinder is backwards, so I have to keep remembering that with my movements. You can see a bit of a discoloration there. But all in all, this needle looks pretty good. If it passes the vacuum or the pressure test, I'm fine with using it. But has your carb been cleaned with carburetor cleaner? Because that rubber tip on the needle will swell up. And when everything's installed on one that has really swollen up badly, it will actually push the inlet arm so far down that it's hitting the plate, kind of like it's sitting right now, and no diaphragm can actuate that. Just won't work. So suspect your needle if you used carburetor cleaner or even brake cleaner without disassembling the carb before blowing some of that stuff through. It's okay to blow that stuff through, but you got to be careful and know what you're doing, since you can do damage. Arm height. Okay, I've gone through how to set these quite a few times. There's tools on the web you can buy that are cheap that help you set the height, but in general, you want that needle or that arm to be flush with this deck, with the gasket removed, or just a smidge below. That is the height that works the best. If you get it together and it won't pass a pressure test, that arm is most likely just a little bit too high and it's hitting your diaphragm and staying open. We'll talk a little more about what that'll cause here in a few minutes. Is your spring, your inlet arm spring, indexed properly? You see, I can flip this over. There's a nub right there. Spring fits around that. If it's jammed sideways or it's somehow shifted as you were putting, whether it's the arm or a whole plate like this, it doesn't matter. Make sure it's indexed properly and not damaged. Either stretched too much or bent all to pieces. If it's bent over at a hard angle, it's not going to operate right. That's as bad as having some links either removed or added. So, okay, check valves. Now, I've got a video devoted to the easy check on this, but not every carburetor has it obvious like this. Zama is famous, and some of the later Walbros are famous for combining the check valve and the nozzle. Now, in reality, this one is the same way, but it's more obvious because you can see this screen here. The later ones are solid brass or bronze, whatever this material is, across the top, and then there's internal passages and there's a groove down below the top, so it's kind of a turret style. Fuel can, no matter what way you clock that nozzle, it'll still get fuel where it needs to go. Well, you can't see that to do a check. So those later ones, you flip it over and you look in the carb throat and you see that nozzle sticking through there. The good news is you can get them out to test them. You just drive them out from the top. Get a drift pin tool and drive it right down into the throat and take it out. Then you can do a test on it. It hasn't been that long ago that I was working on that McCulloch. Was it a 3216 or something from that family? And somehow that check valve was damaged. When I drove the nozzle through, the side was actually bent in. And that's what was causing that saw to not run right. So something very simple like that. But if you didn't check this, get your piece of hose and just do the suck test on it. I know it's not glamorous, it's not, not high tech, but it really works quite well. You should be able to blow through, and if you try to suck like a straw with the hose sealed tight, it shouldn't leak. You know, it shouldn't leak very damn much. If there's more than just a whisper past there, replace it. Because more than likely it's either stiff or gooey at that point. So pop that out, and the kit comes with the new body, new screen, and the new valve that goes underneath it. Very seldom can you get this out without destroying it. So those are the major things on the inside. The only other one I'm going to touch on, which I also see quite often, if your fuel inlet arm is notched and the diaphragm is machined so that it's supposed to fit in that notch, make damn certain as you're reassembling it actually went in there. So many times I've seen it where it's sitting on top and it's holding this open, and it'll be one of those cases where, hey, it'll start but it immediately floods out and running gas everywhere. Well, that's a very common, and it's easy to have it slip. So what I like to do when I get it installed is I'll actually just lightly pull up and make sure there's a little resistance, and then you got to be careful to set the gasket down where it belongs so it doesn't slip out. So yeah, those are the common things I see and that I know of. If you've rebuilt a carburetor and you didn't check all of those, you can't go through your mind and go, yeah, I got all that. Go back into it. If you do all this stuff and it's still acting goofy, it very well may not be an issue in the carburetor. Okay, see, even when I have a list, I forget stuff. So I'll insert this awkwardly in the middle somewhere that it fits, but I wanted to discuss circuit plate gaskets, because on these HDCs, that is critical. So even I've worked on these things so many times, I still have to stop and think and really look at the circuit, look at what it's doing. And I think I finally have a rule of thumb that will work. The HDC kits, you get these two gaskets. Now they look almost exactly the same. In fact, from up, in the viewfinder I can see the difference, but I know what I'm looking for. This one, you've got the passage that ends right here, and then another hole drilled right here. This one, you've got that kind of Z shape. What's the difference? Well, it depends on how you're going to get fuel to your low-speed circuit. Because this one, so you got to figure, the back of your circuit plate is flat. So this gasket, along with these milled areas and these ridges, are going to determine what seals and where fuel flows. So again, that's flat. The only thing that plate is going to impact, you can see there's a hole drilled right there. Well, that happens to line up right over this high speed. See if I can flip this over. Right over this high speed adjustment screw. So that's where the high speed is drawing its fuel from. But if you look at this, the low speed needles here, where does it get its fuel from? And looking under here, that's where it needs to come in, but how in the world does it get there? So if you put this gasket in with the non-Z shape, you can see there's a hole drilled right here. And you can see there's just a little bit of this that is visible. So this outer channel is how fuel is going to move around. Excuse me. And this channel that's cut in the gasket opens up to right here. Okay. Well, how is fuel getting to that point? So how are we controlling this? You know that your low-speed needle is going to meter the amount of fuel that comes in. So that means, follow along with me, fuel has gotten to this point. It's being drawn through. The screw controls how much gets to this point right here. And that is just as best I can tell. I don't believe there's an internal passage. This is all external. So fuel gets to there. It's been metered by the screw. So how does it get where it's going? You've got a plate on top of that. This plate right here is going to go on top of that, and it's going to seal it. How in the world does it ever get to the carburetor? Well, what if you use this Z, or get into the engine? What if you use that Z shape? You got metered fuel, and now it has a way through your main nozzle. And I realize I keep holding this carburetor too far back, but I don't think that was all. Too much of that was out of frame. So metered fuel then can enter the nozzle right there. So that's an important detail. When you use this one, you get next to no idle. You can get the saw to start, but there's not enough fuel that makes it into the engine to allow it to idle. So that's why that is so important. And I said I thought I had a fail-safe, and I'm hoping I do. I'm hoping somebody can't prove me wrong on this. You have a single hole up here. As best I can tell, you need the Z-shaped gasket. If you have a second one above your low speed, then you're going to use this one that does not have that connector tube. As best I can tell, with the HDC carbs I've worked on, that has held true so far. If somebody out there has a situation where it didn't, please let me know, because I want to get that information out there. Carburetor. There's a lot of things that can cause runnability issues that are not carb related. Excuse me. We're going to start with the fuel related stuff, because normally if a saw starts, runs, and then dies out pretty quick, that's a fuel starvation issue. So you've got your fuel filter. Check it. Now, they don't go bad, that often. But one that has had fuel dry up in the tank, that is very well within reason to have it go bad, and I'll show you here. So the original style felt filters. Oh, let's see. Do I have a big one? There we go. But I actually want this one. So this is where the hose hooks on, obviously, and these little passages. That's how it pulls fuel. So you've got your felt, which slips over there, acts as a sponge. It's going to pull fuel through these open passages. Well, one that's dried up, I've seen this multiple times where this is just a solid gob of varnish. You couldn't get anything through when it's jammed up like that. So if you have this style of filter and you've got that horrid varnish smell in your tank, or you know something dried up, check that out. Fuel hoses. Now, there's still a little mystique around fuel hoses, and I get it. If it's a factory formed one and it's hard to find, you don't want to disturb it in case it's good. You don't want to risk destroying a good one. Totally get that. But what you can do, get your filter out of the tank, take the filter off and plug one end, and use your vacuum tester or your pressure tester and see if it'll hold. If it won't build any pressure or vacuum at all, you probably have a slit, a crack, some deterioration somewhere. And again, if you can get air introduced into your fuel system, it'll cause serious issues. Now, if you're running clear Tygon or green or whatever you can see through, same thing. If you're seeing a bunch of air bubbles coming through, you probably ought to figure out why. Whether your filter's not hitting the bottom of the tank or you damaged the line on the way in. You shouldn't see a steady stream of air bubbles continuously in there. So watch out for that. So outside of the saw, you know, we got the filter, we got the hose. The base gasket could be damaged. Now these HDCs, they like to stick to the back. This one's fine. There is not a damn thing wrong with that. I would reuse that gasket any day of the week. But what you'd want to look for is around your impulse hole. Is it torn out? And if it's not, you're probably fine. I mean, obviously if it was ripped in half right here, you probably wouldn't want to reuse it. And you know, if it's a rare gasket, which this one's not, you could try using some silicone or something around it, but most of the time that just makes a big damn mess. I would use the Moto Seal before anything else to try and repair a gasket, but just inspect it, make sure. Same thing if you got an intake block, check the gasket behind it. But we're starting to get out into that stuff that's less common, because the next thing on my list is your reed valves. Now, I can count on one hand the number of times I've had a runnability issue that was hard to track down because of a reed valve. Usually, it's a hard starting saw. It's real hard to get it going. It won't idle for beans, but it'll rev up fairly well. And the minute you let off the throttle, it just blah, dies right back out. So it's something that could be, but it's pretty far down the list of likelihood. And at the bottom of what I've got on my list here is the compression of the saw. If you continually have tuning problems, it's erratic, hard to start, might be worth throwing a compression gauge on there and just seeing where you're at. Now there's a lot of variance, you know, between engines and accepted, you know, levels. In general, it's pretty widely accepted that below 90 psi, it's not going to run. Now, I personally have found if you dunk much below about 110, you're going to have tuning issues, you're going to have power issues. A lot of these old home lights are running in the, you know, the 120 to 150 range. That's a good, safe, solid range. If it's much below 120 and you've got a persistent issue, it's worth considering that could be part of it. Crankshaft seals get blamed all the time for a non-start, unless the seal is completely missing, and even then I'm not sure that would prevent it from starting. Now it would rev to the moon immediately, and it would probably die out just as quick. But a bad crankshaft seal isn't going to prevent you from starting. Doesn't mean you don't have one, but don't replace seals thinking you're going to fix a no start, because I have absolutely never come across that. And who knows, maybe one of these days I'll try starting a saw with a seal popped out just for demonstration purposes. Obviously that wouldn't be a customer saw, it would be something that we were just having a little fun with. But anyway, crankshaft seals, crankcase gaskets, all that kind of stuff, they can cause some real serious issues when they're blown out, but a no start is typically not one of them. Usually it'll at least fire. So again, the two things I hear about the most are it starts and dies out pretty quickly. And again, that's a pretty clear sign of fuel starvation. Not 100% of the time, but almost always. Starts, floods, gas is running out of the back of the carb and or out of the muffler onto the bench. She's failing the pressure test there, folks. That's going to be an inlet arm that is set too high, or the diaphragm's not indexed, but it's holding that needle open. So once that fuel tank builds a little bit of pressure just from being shaken up by the motion of starting, it is running fuel continuously through the carburetor circuit, down into the engine. You can even get a hydrolock to where the starter rope won't pull over if it pumps enough in there. Other outside, things to consider. If you've gone through, now that you've watched whatever this turns into, 10 or 15 minutes of this video, and you're like, man, I have done all that on this carb, I'm sure it's right. Check the compression. Make sure your ignition system is as good as you think it is. Spark at a spark plug. I've shown you on videos that's not always good enough. You need to be able to jump a 1/4 inch gap, And again, you can make one of these tools, the redneck style, just break the ground strap off and you can hold it away from the saw a 1/4 inch and see if it'll jump the gap as you're pulling it over with an old spark plug, if you don't want to buy one of these tools. But make sure your ignition system's in good shape. You know, it's very uncommon in my experience with home light saws, but the on-off switch can go bad to where it's intermittently, you know, making contact or not and grounding the saw out. I've had ignition wires, the 925 series saws. We've gone through the generator coil breaking its wires. That's, you know, not unheard of. We've seen the issue where, you know, the points block was worn so badly that it was intermittently changing the timing depending on where it was at, rocking back and forth there. So there's other things you can consider, but this focus of this was the carburetor stuff. That's a good checklist, and hopefully it'll reduce a little bit of frustration for some of you guys.